Welcome in. It's Big Ten Today. We're presented on this Wednesday by Old National Bank. Great to have you with us, Dave Revson and Anthony Herron. There they are.
It's right there.
Yeah, they even have some prominent signage right here on the set. We were talking about this right before we came on. People may not know this outside of Chicago, but your other main gig is discussing the Chicago Bears.
Yes.
I have to believe this is more uplifting than that.
Agreed. Yes. To talk about the most lucrative conference in intercollegiate athletics.
Yeah.
Yes, there's more joy to be found in this right now than in Bears conversations. But I will say, former Ohio State quarterback Justin Fields had the game of his life the other day. They found a way to give it away at the end.
Play well.
But man, did he look good the other day against the Broncos.
Yeah, and you know who was laughing about the whole thing? Pat Forty, who joins us from Louisville, and of course is a Broncos fan. He finally had some joy in his life. Hello, Pat.
Hey, it was very nice of the Bears to give us our one moment of happiness here as Bronco fans. I appreciated that. I agree Justin Fields did play really well, though, for about 2.5, three quarters. Good enough.
We're going to talk about young Big Ten players who are playing well in the NFL a little bit later in the show. But we're going to turn the focus to what we talk about here, which is Big Ten football and our big story, the schedule ahead this week. Got a game Friday night in Champaign over on FS1, Huskers and Illini. Saturday's biggest game is on Fox, Battle of the Unbeatens, Maryland and Ohio State. Get a better gauge for Rutgers. Scarlet Knights heading to Madison to battle the Badgers. I want to start in Columbus, though, with the Terps and the Buckeyes. And this was a great game, as you guys recall last year. The final score was a little bit deceptive. Maryland had the ball at the end with a chance perhaps to go down and win the game, ended up fumbling it away, and Ohio State got a late touchdown. But a really competitive game. Maryland appears to be better this year. So, Pat, I want to start on their side. Are you a believer in the Terps?
I am. I don't know that I'm a believer that they're going to go into the horseshoe and win, but I think they're going to go into the horseshoe and make Ohio State uncomfortable. I think they're going to be competitive against them for the full 60 minutes. They are better defensively. They can run the football. It is not just drop back and chuck. And I think it's very important to note, too, they've done a good job protecting Talia Tagovailoa so far. You know, as seasons have gone on in the past, he tends to get beaten up a bit by pass rush. So far, he's only been sacked 3 times. And frankly, Ohio State hasn't done a great job getting to the quarterback this year. So I think he's going to have time to throw. I think he's going to have guys open. I think there's going to be points on the board in Columbus. And I think Maryland's going to hang around.
And that experience that you guys are talking about from last season against Ohio State, they outplayed Michigan for the majority of that game, the vast majority in the Big House last year. So there's a lot of guys taking the field for Mike Locksley this weekend who not only think they can compete against the best in the conference, against the best in America, but believe they should have beaten them a couple of times last season. And it doesn't guarantee you anything when you take the field this weekend. But it certainly matters, you know, when you have a bunch of guys who've been on the field, been in hostile territory before, and are past the point of looking around in awe at 100,000 plus or at the volume of an opposing crowd. A lot of these experienced guys will now take pride in the opportunity to silence a crowd at the Horseshoe, will thrive in the environment that's there and recognize that they are good enough. They feel themselves on par with the best teams in America now. And it's beyond me why Maryland isn't ranked in the top 25 yet at this point in the season. But like you referenced, this is a squad, not only the experience that's there, but some of the inexperience playing at a high level. Now we'll see what their linebacker, their stud linebacker, Jayshon Barham, if he's healthy enough to compete on the field this weekend or not. So that'd be a big loss if they don't have him out there for another game. But even without him last week, the defense was exceptional yet again.
Here's the one thing I would say about the defense, and I'm interested in you guys responding. And we had Locks on yesterday, and we heaped praise on that defense. And Brian Williams done an amazing job because for years that was not a formidable defense.
Right.
It certainly is statistically right now. The one thing I would say is if you look at the FBS teams that they have played, there's only one who's in the top 100 in total offense, and they're in the 80s, and that's Michigan State. Everyone else is 105 or worse. So, Pat, you look at this matchup here, and yes, Maryland looks to be greatly improved. And again, we gave a ton of plaudits to Brian Williams yesterday. I think he deserves every single one of them. But this is a different level of test. Had Mike Locksley said as much as that when he was on us yesterday, talking about matching up with Marvin Harrison and some of the studs that Ohio State has.
Yeah, no doubt. This is a rubber hits the road sort of moment for that defense because they have compiled impressive statistics against lesser competition, which is kind of what Notre Dame had done going into the Ohio State game. Now, Notre Dame actually acquitted itself well defending the pass against Ohio State until the last drive. But one of the things they did was to bracket Marvin Harrison all over the field and say somebody else is going to have to do it. And I wonder if Maryland might copy that game plan to a degree. Not sure whether they have a corner as talented, as gifted as Benjamin Morrison is for Notre Dame there, but if you can make Marvin Harrison just into at least a normal human receiver as opposed to a 200-yard, 3-touchdown guy against you, maybe that gives you a bit of a chance to slow down the passing attack there. And now they're going to have to stop the run as well because TreVeyon Henderson, I think, has been underrated this season. He's having a very good year, and that's one of the keys, I think, for Ohio State is having pretty good balance back and forth there. So a lot of stress on the Maryland defense. We'll see exactly how much they're up to the challenge.
He was so banged up last season, right, Pat, that it's almost like people forgot about TreVeyon Henderson a little bit. But healthy, we see how explosive he is. And that, to me, is going to be key for Ohio State because Kyle McCord just dropping back and trying to air the football out on a consistent basis. It's not who the Buckeyes have been so far this season, and I don't necessarily think that's the biggest advantage Ohio State will have. That receiver core, all the stars they have available to them. But the strength of Maryland's defense is their secondary. I mean, Tarheeb still is one of the best corners in America, and we've seen him get back into playmaker mode so far this season. But this is the moment that Mike Locksley has been sort of methodically building towards to get the program to the point where, he told us about it before the season, that he believes they're ready to compete for championships. And just think about what the program was when he took it over. There's obviously a couple of programs in the Big Ten this season that are having their struggles off the field. And we know where Maryland was when Mike Locksley got this job after the Jordan McNair tragedy. And now, just a handful of years later, to have them in this position from sort of the depths that the entire athletic department were in, he was the perfect man to hire at that time. And he's had the patience. And Damon Evans, the AD, has patiently sort of worked with him year over year to get it to this point. And so whether it is throwing the football, running the football, defending the pass, defending the run, this is an all-around formidable Maryland team that I think will go out there and show themselves well in that hostile environment in Columbus.
You bring up a really good point, though. This is the next step. This is the game they haven't won.
Right.
In their time in the Big Ten. I mean, they literally have not beaten a ranked team in a conference game during their time in the Big Ten. They're 0-31, and 29 of them have been decided by double-digit margins. So can you take the next step? Doesn't necessarily have to be this one. Mm-hmm. You got a few other opportunities, or at least two more, certainly later in the year.
I shouldn't say it's hard to imagine. I believe they will get one of these, whether it's this week or Penn State or Michigan, and they just feel ready for that.
They do feel ready, but those other teams are pretty good, and they're pretty good too. Purdue and Iowa, first game for the Hawkeyes without Cade McNamara. He is out for the year. Purdue, Pat, coming off its best performance. They really played well in what looked like a toss-up game against Illinois. It was anything but a toss-up, kind of blew them out there in the second half. What do you see as the key matchup here, Hawkeyes and Boilermakers?
Yeah, you wonder if that's a program turning the corner there for Ryan Walters. They'd been up and down, inconsistent through the initial part of the season under him, and then all of a sudden, boy, you put it together the way they did, and it was pretty dazzling. Great running attack, throwing the ball, and then shutting down Illinois as well, just dominating, as you said, the second half of the game. And you know what? That can snowball. That can get going now, and all of a sudden they start having a little belief in the new guys, the new system, and everything falls into place. Now, that said, Iowa, on the other hand, boy, a very tough set of circumstances. Cade McNamara getting hurt, you hated to see that for him, and you hate that for the Hawkeyes because they are already thin at the quarterback position. We are praying for the Deacon as he takes over at quarterback there that he can stay healthy and maybe execute a little more in that offense. They're just so challenged being able to move the ball, throw the ball. I think it even puts them further in reliance on the Ferentz formula. Defense, kicking game, field position, patience, and try to just come out of there with a victory. But I like where Purdue is at going into this game.
Praying for the Deacon. I feel like maybe there's a 40 headline that's already being written, regardless of the result of the game, perhaps. And the mobility of the quarterback has been a limiting factor because Cade McNamara has been out there and his lower body has been banged up with the soft tissue injuries. It did look like early in the game their offense, their quarterback was finally getting back to the point where we were seeing some of the things we're accustomed to from Iowa's offense with some bootlegs, some sprint action, some roll action, just to vary the launch point a bit, and then McNamara goes down. And I do believe Deacon Hill, even though he's a big, thick-bodied guy, but he is a guy with some mobility to him. Will they be able to get back to the point where he has a full week of game planning available to him to get that pocket on the move consistently? I believe they're going to need to, because this Purdue defense, we saw it with Ryan Walters calling it again against the Illini this past weekend, and it's a salty scheme. The personnel sort of mano-a-mano up front, I don't believe that's advantage Purdue, but if they can hit blocks up front and stymie Iowa's rushing attack, put the Hawkeyes into predictable downs and distances, and the running backs for Iowa are such a big part of their pass protection that some of the youth and inexperience that's there because Caleb Johnson is out, because Jazzy and Patterson has been out, and they do rotate bodies in the backfield. If you continue to be thin and young at running back with the variety of angles that Ryan Walters loves to pressure from, then it can make life really difficult on the pass protection. So moving the launch point, I think, is going to be a big deal.
Well, defense was the area where Purdue struggled early on, and as you say, dramatically different with Ryan Walters calling defense. That and turnovers, that was the other big issue. But you look at Iowa's offense, and we've outlined the issues. I mean, they have less than 300 yards the last two games, and that's not each game. I mean, it is each game, but it's also combined. Right? They have less than 300 yards combined. And in this day and age, less than 300 in one game is considered a not very good game. So when you've got it over two, it's going to be a challenge. We'll see whether or not this
complimentary football for Ryan Walters is going to be tested.
If there is any team that is designed to win that way, as Pat said, it is Iowa. So we'll see how Purdue does against that. Rutgers going to Wisconsin, Pat. What chance do you give the
lost the sound there.
We may have lost Pat there, so I will ask you. Okay. What chance do you give the Scarlet Knights?
So I just had their game this past weekend, Dave, and it's against Wagner, but getting to talk to Greg Schiano and his staff, getting to watch that game play out in person, it reminded me a little bit of watching the Illini last season, where Illinois, especially on defense, there was sort of this attitude, this temperament that Illinois played with that I thought just reverberated. And Joe Harris-Samiak was talking about, like, how loud is our film when you're just watching the coach's film and you're watching it on silent. There's a loud film. This is a defense that plays with violence. Yeah. This is a team that is confident in a similar way like I was talking about with Maryland because of the way Schiano has begun to build it towards this point. Now, I don't view them as on par defensively. They're not as good. They're not as talented quite on the back end or pass rushers up front as what the Illini had last season. But, Pat, I was really impressed with how Rutgers was just in attack mode throughout that game. I think that's, may not be something that carries the day this weekend against, some of the best teams in America as they move forward here. But I was thoroughly impressed with just their attitude. And I believe if it's not Maryland, I think that it could be Rutgers who knocks off one of the big dogs in the conference this season, Pat.
Yeah, I've liked what I've seen out of them so far, Anthony. I really have. I would have liked to have seen just a little bit more offensive productivity against Michigan. I thought they had a chance maybe to stay in that game a little bit longer, but just couldn't get going on that side. But, yeah, defensively, loud film, I can believe it. They hit, they get after it, they fly to the football. It's very much a Schiano mentality. And it'll be interesting to see what Wisconsin's mentality is coming into this offensively. Yeah. I dove into some first down numbers. In the 6 years before Luke Fickell took over, they were on first down 70 to 80% run. So, very predictable, run heavy. This year, 59.4%. So they're a little bit less stereotypical. They've been throwing it more on first down, mixing it up a little bit more. Now, maybe the offensive changes have also hurt Wisconsin's defense as far as just the tempo and everything, and they're not stopping people as much. But offensively, they're less stereotypical, and I think that's going to be important against a Rutgers team that is built to stop the run first and foremost.
And I would say that the growth of Rutgers offense, I think Kirk Shiraka working with Gavin Wimsatt, I'm really excited to see what that grows into. That RPO system that usually it's year 2 where guys get more comfortable in it. We're seeing more and more of it from Wimsatt. And his mobility, his running ability is really only a small part of what their offense has been so far. I think they'll continue to ascend there.
They appear to be much better offensively. And we'll see. I mean, it's not going to be overpowering. I don't think that's ever the design, but Kirk Shiraka's made a huge difference there. And you couple that with a really good defense and sound special teams and got yourself a pretty good team, which is what it appears Rutgers has. Hey, one note on the Friday night game. If you were scrolling around social media last night, you may have seen this. There's a fire at Memorial Stadium in Champaign. Illinois issued a statement. They confirmed the fire, said it was quickly extinguished with no injury. So great news there. They went on to say, quote, the Illinois football team hosts Nebraska at Memorial Stadium on Friday. The Department of Intercollegiate Athletics will continue to evaluate the facility over the course of the next day, but early indications are positive that the stadium will be prepared to host the game as scheduled and without interruption of seating or services on Friday.
Big Ten Today is presented by Old National Bank, official bank of the Big Ten Conference.
Hot off the presses in advance of Media Day next week, the Big Ten women's basketball coaches and media releasing their preseason polls for the 2023-24 season. First, the coaches. They have the 2023 national runner-up Iowa, led by National Player of the Year Caitlin Clark, picked first. Ohio State, with last season's Freshman of the Year, and Cody McMahon, is second, followed by Indiana and All-American Mackenzie Holmes. Then Maryland and Illinois round out the top 5. As for the members of the media, they too have the Iowa women first. Some differences, though, after that. Indiana is second, followed by the Buckeyes. Brenda Fries's Maryland team is fourth, as they were with the coaches, and the media has Michigan ranked fifth. Here's a look at who the coaches and media have on their preseason all-conference teams. Clark, a unanimous choice of both the coaches and media. Joining her on the coaches and media preseason all-Big Ten teams, Indiana's Holmes. What?
Really? Caitlin Clark?
Okay, well, that was a delayed reaction. Cheyenne Sellers of Maryland, Layla Feely of Michigan, as well as McMahon, fellow Buckeye J.C. Sheldon, Makaira Cook of Illinois, Nebraska's Jazz Shelley and Alexis Markowski, and Penn State's McKenna Marisa, Mara Braun of Minnesota, selected by the coaches. And this one from the shocking but true file. Ant, you ready? I need the appropriate reaction time.
Okay.
Caitlin Clark is the 2023-24 preseason player of the year.
Say what?
Yeah. In the eyes of both the coaches and the media, she, of course, swept all the major National Player of the Year awards last season, led the nation in assists each of the past 2 seasons, was the nation's leading scorer as a freshman and sophomore, finished second in scoring last year.
Big Ten Today is presented by Old National Bank, official bank of the Big Ten Conference.
Saturday, Northwestern wraps up the non-conference slate with a matchup against Howard. Big Ten football powered by Unleaded 88. Saturday, 3 Eastern on the Big Ten Network and the Fox Sports app. Our coverage begins with the pregame show at 2:30 Eastern Time. September in the rearview mirror, and this seemed like as good a time as any to put that month into perspective. So we're going to hand out some month awards. Pat, we will give you the first say on the Coach of the Year. Where are you going?
Coach of the Year, look, I think you have to start with Mike Locksley at Maryland there, what he's done. And Anthony did a good job kind of detailing the year-over-year growth that they've made. If you're Maryland, there's basically like, this is men's tennis when Nadal, Federer, and Djokovic were all at the top of their game, and somebody has to be Andy Murray, the 4th best. That's kind of Maryland right now with Penn State, Michigan, and Ohio State ahead of them. They're the Andy Murray of this group, but it's a good accomplishment to be Andy Murray. That's not bad. So I give Mike Locksley a lot of credit, but I also want to say a kind word about David Braun, who took over a brutal situation at Northwestern. After the first game, I thought they might go winless. They've won 2 games. They had the stirring comeback against Minnesota, so he's done a nice job as well.
I will agree on the Michael Locksley notion there, and I was detailing, of course, some of that earlier in the show. And for the season Maryland's put together so far, where every phase of the game is executing at a high level, and then frankly, when it's not, we're seeing more of a formidable sort of aptitude for the team, a DNA in that locker room that is in their coach's image. You know, I called Mike Locksley games back when he was at New Mexico years ago, and it's you can see the difference in him. Now that he's been around the block in the coaching community that much longer, his ability to manage the entire program, to nurture the emotions of his players, to certainly let his quarterback, Talia Tagovailoa, know the importance that he has and his maturity in getting through hard times in game and during the week and the detailed preparation. All those things show up now on the film, on the field. And, I don't know if it's an Andy Murray thing, an Andre Agassi perhaps, where, remember Agassi shaved his head? He used to have like the big
flowing locks. And
would Penn State be Agassi then? And then maybe Maryland is Murray?
I don't know. I'm going to defer. We're mixing generations, and Murray and Agassi. I didn't really realize we were going to go to the USTA rankings.
Okay,
in all of this.
Throw Michael Chang in the mix, just a notch below.
Pat's taking
knocking
us
at the door
down that road. Yeah, the Bjorn Borg. I don't know who anyone is in all this, but I do know there's two really good choices. And I will say this: if either one of them is the coach of the month in October, we're going to have a heck of a story on our hands. Either one of them would be notable. What about the player of the month for September? Where are you going there, Pat?
Boy, you could go like 6 different ways with this. I think you have to go with Talia Tagovailoa and what he's done there, leading the offense and being the dynamic passer and the team leader now, too, at Maryland, the way he's performed. So I'm going there. But, gosh, you can make a case for Travion Henderson, who I talked about at Ohio State, amongst all the good players there. Roman Wilson, 8 touchdown catches at Michigan. Penn State, somebody. They've got so many good players. They all are they're so balanced. Statistically, performance-wise, I don't know who you say is the best player at Penn State, but they got a lot of them. So there are plenty of choices, but I think I'm going with Talia, and we'll see how things shake out. He could obviously do a lot to become the player of the month in October on Saturday in the Horseshoe.
Just grading the snap-in, snap-out film, you can make a case for Olu Fashanu at Penn State. You can make a case for Chop Robinson at Penn State. But a guy who came in as the presumed best quarterback in the conference, and J.J. McCarthy, I really think his game has just been so exceptional this season because what he was earlier in his career, both as a true freshman quarterback, rotating in some, and even last season was a guy who they had to find ways to sort of throttle him down and make sure he wasn't going to put the ball in harm's way, wasn't going to search for ways or reasons to go off script too frequently. And now you're seeing him seemingly at the height of his powers where he can manage both in the X's and O's and then go beyond the X's and O's when it's necessary as well. And there's a precision to the way that he's playing the position that we just haven't seen him be able to sort of put out there consistently at earlier points in his career. So I believe for the team, who's the number one team in the conference so far this season, having a quarterback who hasn't had the run game we anticipated throughout the entire season, and other elements of Michigan's game hasn't all necessarily been dominant, but J.J. McCarthy, it was the one game where he threw some interceptions, but even in other games where he's thrown the ball into harm's way, it's been with velocity, accuracy, precision, timing. We're seeing a guy playing at a really high level.
To Pat's point, if you throw it reasonably close to harm's way, but also reasonably close to Roman Wilson, I like your odds. I will say this. I'm not saying he's the player of the month. And he's injured the last game, so that even makes it a less of a case. But I did not have Darius Taylor leading the nation in rushing coming out of September, so he has been really good for a Minnesota team that has kind of needed that offensive infusion. What about a team of the month, Pat? Where would you go there?
Again, a very close competition between the undefeated teams there, but I would say Ohio State, based on having the big W so far at Notre Dame. That's, I think, the most important game really nationally this year, and to get the win on the road and the way they got it, coming from behind at the end, making the big plays when they had to. Obviously, Kyle McCord grew up a whole bunch during that game. Then to get the 1 yard when they needed it, I'm not sure it was worth going after Lou Holtz afterwards from Ryan Day, but still a really big win for him, for the program, for the Buckeyes, and it very much establishes their credentials as a college football playoff prime contender. Obviously, a lot of big games to come, but I like where Ohio State's at and what they've shown with a new quarterback coming into this month and coming now out of it into October.
I was all for it. Go after old Coach Lou. We're seeing Ryan Day just kind of continue to evolve a bit, I think, before our eyes. And part of that was talking not only to the folks around him, but to his team, I think, as well. But the coach of the month for me or the team of the month for me is Penn State, because of the way that James Franklin has actually led them. And we're seeing an offense that has a quarterback who's extremely talented, that has some highlight reel throws, but they're more insulated on offense now than they've been in previous seasons. And so we're seeing an offense that can play under control, that can sort of convert those short yardage scenarios that we didn't always see them showing the capability to convert, and an approach that says we're hoping to grow, we're looking for those chunk plays, but it's not there yet. And it hasn't mattered. And even some of the miscues on special teams haven't mattered as much because of the way that he's managed that defense also. So there's a dominance in State College that you could certainly make a case Penn State has been the best team in the Big Ten, especially when you're factoring in a schedule that's had a variety of Power 5 opponents coming up to this point also, and they've just dominated everyone across the board. Maybe not a full 4 quarters every single week, but a half of play, quarters of play, 3 quarters of play. When they've had to put their foot on the throttle, Penn State has been able to do it, and they've done it against top to bottom, probably more formidable schedules than either Michigan or Ohio State has done.
Well, you used the word dominant there a couple times. They have been dominant. I mean, they're riding the longest streak of double-digit wins going back to 1912 through 13. So 10 straight double. Yeah, it's been a long time since we have seen them this dominant. No Michigan for either one of you guys, and maybe just a function of not playing a great schedule to this point. But it'll be interesting. Penn State and Ohio State obviously playing in a couple weeks, so we'll get a sense as we look at who's going to be the team of October. That may have go a long way towards determining it. How about the game of the month? What's been the best one in your eyes, Pat?
Well, if we're talking a non-conference game, it's got to be Ohio State Notre Dame, and I kind of covered that one there. But that again was it was a big win in a big atmosphere within the conference. Hey, the first one, Minnesota-Nebraska, the comeback that Minnesota was able to make there, the touchdown catch. Oh my gosh, with the game on the line, fantastic play. And unfortunately, we saw a little bit of a precursor of what was going to happen with Nebraska. Struggles offensively, key turnovers, things they just couldn't put together and haven't still yet put together. So, dramatic opening to Big Ten play. Exciting night in Minneapolis and got Minnesota off to a very good start there. They've struggled a little bit off and on after that, but still, that was a very eventful start to Big Ten play for sure.
There was certainly some drama in Iowa City just the other night between the Hawkeyes and the Spartans. Starting quarterback goes down, a punt return essentially wins the game late in a raucous Kinnick Stadium. So that was a pretty cool one. But from a biased perspective, I got to call such a great comeback that Northwestern had against Minnesota. So that's my choice so far for game of the initial month, for the month of September, because of what the game ended up indicating, that Minnesota in a one-score game in the opener was able to narrowly pull that out, and that margin is so razor thin for so many of these teams, and PJ Fleck ended up suffering at the hands of that in Evanston, where they had a chance to pull away in the second half. And the storyline of where Northwestern's season was coming in and what it has the potential to become now was sort of written that night. It was one thing to see them against UTEP and them dominating the second half there, but picking up a Big Ten win and frankly following that game up with a quality performance against Penn State, one of the best teams in America. I believe that fourth quarter that we witnessed in Evanston that night, where they came back for that win after being down 21 points against Minnesota, that they were able to roll into what we saw against Penn State as well. So on the whole, I think that game is going to be a fulcrum. If Northwestern can end up putting a quality season together after everything else that program has kind of been through coming into the year, I think that Minnesota game is going to be a big reason why.
It was the best announced game of the month.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
It was just,
especially by the play.
Well, it's more the
analyst is right.
Lisa was really good. The halftime show.
Was exceptional.
Was fabulous. Yeah, it was really good. Is Tracey Fuchs. She joins us for our big interview. Coach, 11 straight wins, which is the longest run of your tenure. What do you feel best about with your team at this point?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for having me. We're just playing consistent. We're solid across all 3 lines, up front, in the midfield, and in the back. And, our defense is playing well. Our attack is generating more than enough scoring chances. And when that happens, good things happen. So really pleased with where we are right now.
So the answer is you feel best about everything. You feel best about your team.
Yeah, I keep saying we're good everywhere, maybe not great anywhere, but we're very, very consistent. We have one of the best goalkeepers, I think, in the country. who has a great defense in front of her. And then, we're getting a lot of scoring from a lot of different people, which hasn't always been the case in the last few years, but everybody's pitching in, and it's Team Wildcat hockey, so life is good.
It's been interesting to see, particularly some young players really chipping in. It's interesting that you lost your first game of the year to what has turned out to be a really good Louisville team. But to what extent do you think that fueled this run?
Yeah, I think we didn't. We actually played quite well in that game and dominated statistically. Nothing fell, and Louisville played a fantastic game. So we knew that start, even though we didn't get the result we wanted, that we were in a pretty good place. And, we have some great leadership, 3 graduate students and a heck of a lot of seniors. So we have a lot of players that will be able to fight through adversity if more bumps come throughout the season.
You were the national runners-up last year. You won the national championship the year before. Describe the difference mentality-wise when you come into a season where maybe you fell just a smidge short of what you wanted last year. Obviously, it was an incredible year to finish second in the country, but the year before you had won it all. Does that change the mentality at all coming into the year?
I think so. I think, we have a very confident group. We knew we lost some really key players, including Maddie Zimmer, who's taken a redshirt year to go play with the U.S. team. So we knew we would have to be a little bit more creative this year and, again, have more balanced scoring. And I think, the Cats have come out and have done that and have created scoring chances. And, our corner execution has gotten better over the course of the last 6 weeks. So we need to continue that. We're a little bit inconsistent still, but it always puts us in a position to win, and that makes me happy.
You're in your 15th year at the helm of Northwestern. You're the winningest coach in the history of the program. We mentioned all the great teams that you've had here in recent years. I'm curious, which is more difficult? Is it more difficult to build the program, or is it more difficult to maintain the program?
I think both are difficult. I think it was challenging and really, really fun to try to turn Northwestern field hockey back around to where they were in the 90s. And then, to keep, we always want to be in the top 5. I'm a competitor. Anybody I recruit comes out on the field and they're going to be competitors. So we don't want our legacy to be diminished. So every year it's to vie for national championships, vie for Big Ten championships, and just play really solid hockey across the board.
It's one thing to say to a recruit, we're going to attempt to win a national championship. Our goal is to win a national championship. It is a different one to say, hey, we've won a national championship. How does that change recruiting? Does it make it easier for you to sell? Are you selling a different kind of player?
I mean, first of all, Northwestern's a great place to go to school and spend 4 years of your life on campus. But certainly our success has helped us attract some of the top talent in our country. You can see Olivia Ben-Cole, national team player, and then we have 3 or 4 that are on our under-21 team, and Lauren Wattis just added to the national team. So we're definitely attracting that talent both as students and as athletes, and I think we're getting the right people on the bus. Our culture's in a good place, and we have great people around us and support staff that helps as well.
Coach, we've had you on a couple times before. I mentioned your moniker as the Michael Jordan of field hockey. You're considered by many to be the greatest player in the history of the sport. You're a 2-time Olympian. It was interesting. I was going through it in prepping for this, and I saw an article where you said, had I been born a man, I would have been a 5-time Olympian. Clarify what you meant by that.
Yeah. Well, back in the day, they only had 6 teams that went to the Olympics for the women side of field hockey, and they had 12 for men. So I missed out on 3 Olympics because we didn't have the same amount of teams as the men, and now we do. and I'll always fight for gender equity, whether it be in sport or out of sport. So I'm happy that the young ladies playing for the national team now have the same opportunities as their male counterparts. So I just was born a little bit too early.
And that speaks to a bigger issue, which you and I have spoken about before, and it is the gender equity component of this. This is something that you have certainly seen, as you just outlined there, throughout your career. Where do you think we are in that battle right now to have women's sports on a level playing field with the men?
Yeah, I think we're gaining on it. Somebody, a very influential coach at another school told me the crumbs are getting bigger, but they're still crumbs. So we always, and I will always, fight to push women to have the same equity as the men. And at Northwestern, you know, it's the women's sports are doing so well, and it's because we value that here, and that's probably why I've stayed for the last 15 years.
You talk about Northwestern. Anyone who's watching the Big Ten Network knows it was a rough summer at Northwestern. How has that impacted the coaches in terms of bringing you closer together? Like, to what extent have you rallied around one another?
Yeah, I think we were close before. I think through COVID, the head coaches were a tight group. We're even closer now. We're always bouncing things off of each other. And as you said, it was a very tough summer, but it was nice to get going and get back on the field and see my players and start the season. And, you know, I have so many good people around me, my mentors and head coaches in other sports. So we're always there for each other, and we always will be.
Well, you mentioned your team, again, off to a tremendous start. This is a huge test coming up on Friday against Iowa. I know we are all looking forward to having it here on the Big Ten Network. They're the highest scoring team in the country. What's the biggest challenge when you face the Hawkeyes?
Yeah, I mean, they're also solid. They're solid from goalkeeping all the way up front. And it is going to be a battle. They always draw a great crowd out in Iowa City. And honestly, it'll probably come down to corner execution for both teams. They have, you know, one of the best first years in the country who's hitting the heck out of the ball. And our corners gotten better and better each and every week. So it just, who's going to bring their A game, who's going to be consistent throughout the match and, you know, ride the momentum waves. But we'll be ready to go, and we can't wait to play such a great team as Iowa.
Looking forward to watching it on Friday. Tracey Fuchs, always great to visit with you. Thanks so much for your time, and best of luck going forward.
Awesome. Thanks, Dave. Have a wonderful day. Go Cats.
Our Big Stat is brought to you by Old National Bank. We're focusing in on the impact that some recent Big Ten stars are having at the next level. Number 2 overall pick, C.J. Stroud, off to a really good start in Houston. Illinois' Devin Witherspoon, the star of the Seahawks Monday night win, a 97-yard return on a pick 6. And Isaiah Pacheco, he put on a show, I should say, for Taylor Swift. The former Rutgers star continues to play well for the Super Bowl champs. I'm sure she was fixated. Who is this Isaiah Pacheco, right?
He's going to be
a 7th-round pick.
He's going to be in a song lyric at some point here.
Yeah, I'm
probably
sure
got a lot more
she was
social
impressed.
media followers now.
All right, so the Impact 5 is the top 5 first and second year players making an impact in the NFL. You're going to count it down Letterman style. Where you started?
So Seacrest style, I prefer to begin at number 5 and work up from there. And these youngsters in the National Football League who've transitioned from the Big Ten, they don't all have the exact same role within their team. A guy like Isaiah Pacheco is where I start at number 5 because, you know, he's on an offense where obviously the quarterback is the star of every situation that you're involved with Patrick Mahomes. But then beyond that, the passing attack as a whole. But then the run game has been so big in the success that they've had this season. Pacheco averaging almost 5 yards a carry. He, when in splitting carries, has just come off of a 100-yard performance. And like it just referenced, Dave, Taylor Swift was in the house. So I think his star status will continue to go up and rise from this point forward, too.
I heard a little generational difference there when Dave Revson said Letterman style and Anthony said Seacrest style. I'm on the Letterman side of that divide. But Isaiah Pacheco has been fantastic. 7th-round pick, and I will say, as a Chief hater, as a Bronco fan, when they drafted him, I was like, oh no, they're going to make him into a useful weapon, and they sure have. He was a banger back at Rutgers, but he's shown a little more wiggle, shown the ability to catch passes. He's been a great weapon for Andy Reid.
This is an ongoing joke, by the way, between us, the Letterman and Seacrest thing. And I think only we think it's funny, but I'm glad that you were at least moderately amused by it. Who's number 4?
Number 4, a player who doesn't necessarily get a lot of statistics to record, but was one of the top picks in this past NFL draft after an amazing career at Ohio State. Paris Johnson Jr. is playing with an Arizona Cardinals squad that a lot of folks just presume is in this rebuild mode, but he's at right tackle starting every game and is already viewed as their best offensive lineman. He's blocking for a running back who's putting up big yards. He's blocking for a quarterback that's extremely efficient. And to be able to do that and give up limited pass pressures, I've been really impressed with Paris Johnson Jr. And as this organization tries to build towards the future, maybe he flips over to left tackle, but they should feel solidified with having him in the lineup.
One of my all-time favorite college players, Paris Johnson. Why? He wrote for the student paper at Ohio State.
Journalism major.
He was an actual student journalist at the Lantern. He was also a heck of a player. I mean, he was the #1 tackle coming out of high school, out of Cincinnati. He lived up to it brilliantly at Ohio State, and now the next transition's been very easy for him as well, clearly so far at Arizona.
He's coming for your job, Pat, but the good news for you is he's really playing well in the NFL.
Right.
So you've got a few years.
He doesn't need my job.
Exactly. Well, you got a few years either way, right? Even if he does decide that he needs it. Who do you got at number 3?
Number 3 is a guy who had to replace essentially a teammate, a peer, another Hawkeye. Let's go to the Detroit Lions, where Sam Laporta has been so exceptional for them early this season, leading all tight ends in the National Football League in receptions. And for an offense that was already solidified with a veteran quarterback and multiple talented running backs, best offensive lineman in football, to have a rookie tight end who ends up essentially replacing T.J. Hockenson, who was also one of the best young tight ends in the National Football League, but they made a defined decision to move on from Hockenson and not pay that spot. Then you bring in some rookie who's been maybe just as good as T.J. Hockenson, not necessarily as a blocker, but as a pass receiver, that safety valve that he's been for Jared Goff in the Lions offense. Sam Laporta, to me, is a guy who has to be on this list, Pat.
Absolutely. No, he's been fantastic. And look, what do the Hawkeyes produce? Linemen, tight ends from the offensive side of the ball that really do well in the NFL. His transition has been seamless so far. Great hands, runs routes, dependable, and then athletic enough to make some plays after the catch as well. So Sam Laporta, another Hawkeye doing well in the NFL.
Tight end you. It is
right. No doubt
quite
about
a
that.
lineage. Where are you going with number 2?
Number 2 for me is I was talking about that Illini defense from last season, and with so much temperament and how they just made everything difficult on every opponent, the face of that was Devin Witherspoon, and he's bringing that same exact mentality to the National Football League for that Seattle defense. We remember what the Legion of Boom was when they were competing for Super Bowls. Maybe he's a cog in kind of making that happen again. In the game he had the other night in prime time, what was it, like 7 tackles, had a couple of sacks in the game, 95-yard return touchdown as well. There's no one in the National Football League in the history of the NFL who's put those numbers together as a defender on the same exact night. So Devin Witherspoon, Pat, was kind of introduced to the country with the versatility he brings on defense.
Sure was, and yes, that's another one where fit with coach and scheme is perfect with Pete Carroll and what he does defensively at Seattle. He was absolutely a guy that just fits what they do, and he's a great player. Look, we've seen the drop-off with the Illinois defense from year over year, and a big part of that was losing him, losing Sidney Brown, and a couple of other real studs from that Illinois defense, and he has just made an instant impact and probably will continue to do so. He can cover, he can hit. As you noted, he can get after the passer even. You can do a lot of things with Devin Witherspoon.
Yeah, that's the big thing that you mentioned there in terms of that decline in Illinois' defense. We've been talking a lot this year about what's going on here. You got 2 All-Americans up front on defense. Nobody's got that. You had the #1 defense in America last year. Ryan Walters' departure may have something to do with that, but you lose 3 players in your secondary who go in the first 3 rounds of the draft, including a guy who's making an instant impact like Witherspoon is. You definitely understand why the Illini are maybe having some challenges finding their footing. So that leaves one last spot to be claimed. Yeah. Who do you have as number 1?
I'm going to have to disagree with you where you referred to C.J. Stroud as having played good so far this season. Maybe you even said very good. I think he's been
I'm sure I said well.
historic.
Or did I say he has been good, or did I say he's played well?
I think you
because
said
I think
he
I would
has
have
been
used
good.
He has been good. Okay,
He has been
I would have
good.
used the adjective good. I would not
He
have
has
said
been
he played good.
historic in his performance
Okay,
so far.
all right. So
you're
not getting at the verbiage.
No.
You're getting
You
at
are
the
just
sentiment, the
underselling
sentiment.
how
Oh,
amazing C.J. Stroud
Okay.
has been so far this season. For again, a franchise that was thought to be rebuilding coming in. He's won his last 2 games. Only one quarterback has ever thrown for more yards through their first 4 starts than C.J. Stroud. And Pat, he has yet to throw an interception. C.J. Stroud, right now for a rookie quarterback, is playing beyond anyone's expectations.
Had any doubts about him, just go back and put back on the tape of the game against Georgia last year, his last college game. Absolutely lights out in a pressure situation. A baller, big heart, big brain. I love what he is doing so far for the Texans.
I think he's been fabulous.
Oh,
I think he's
you know
been
what?
sensational.
How about spectacular?
Spectacular.
Remarkable,
He has. He's had a remarkable.
Impeccable.
campaign. Well, all right. We're running out of time.
Stupendous.
We're running out of adjectives.
Splendiferous? Can I make up a word?
Pat, this was a ton of fun. We'll see you
His
next week.
stats are ginormous.
And we hope to see you tomorrow here on Big Ten.
Indubitably.